Ramju, and I am an attorney at a Ramju law firm where we empower, educate, and advocate for those seriously injured in vehicle accidents. And today we're going to be covering a topic that routinely comes up here at the office. And that question is, what is a police report? What is a police report for? Why did we get a police report? Do I need a police report? And I want to cover those topics today so that there's less confusion and more clarity on this topic. Police reports can be incredibly helpful when working on a case. It can give us some key information we otherwise might not have been able to gather. And the honesty about this situation is this: when you're involved in an accident, especially one involving significant injuries, it can be impossible to take care of yourself, potentially your family members, as well as gather all the information surrounding the accident. So hopefully today this is going to give you some clarity as to what police reports are for, why we get them, and what they're going to be used for going forward. So why is a police report important? So first off, let's just set the stage. The people that prepare the police report is, of course, police officers. And police officers arrive at many accident scenes at any given point in any given year. Their ability to then recall the information and remember who was there, what happened, what their investigative steps were is dang near impossible. Certainly, there'll be situations where officers arrive at a scene and the facts of the accident were just so incredibly unusual or memorable that maybe they'll account for those experiences or memories. But the ability for them to recall all the information in any given accident is not likely. So these police reports are created, and the police reports have a number of information in them, really incredibly helpful information. They're going to have basic details as far as the names of the individuals involved in the accident, their contact information, and insurance details. It'll have an accident description. Sometimes they'll have accident diagrams so that we can better understand where the vehicles were at when they were approaching the accident location and where they landed after the accident. It can also include the officer's interpretation of what took place, which can be extremely helpful given that the officers are one of the first people that arrive on the scene. That oftentimes when officers get there, all of the people who may have been involved in the accident were also present, and the debris in the vehicles were likely where they landed after the accident, which isn't the case oftentimes by the time we get involved in a case, because vehicles are towed, debris is moved, and the whole accident scene is essentially disturbed from what took place just shortly after the accident took place. There may also be in police reports citations. Now, we have gone down the exploratory path of why officers issue citations or not, and there's a whole depth of reasons why somebody may be given a citation. But when citations are issued, it can be extremely persuasive and helpful to adjusters, defense counsel, and others who are interpreting what took place, because the officer's interpretation that somebody violated a crime to cause the accident can be extremely helpful in determining fault and liability in a case. You may also see in a police report weather and road conditions. So just because an accident happens doesn't mean that one person's wholly responsible for the accident. There may be a number of variables that contributed to the accident, such as slick roads, such as snow, such as precipitation. There may be all sorts of different variables, and knowing what the road conditions were at the time of the accident can be incredibly helpful in understanding why the accident happened and what took place to cause the accident. Also, it should be noted that police reports, for the most part, are considered neutral. I mean, the officer, as far as the civil case, doesn't really have a dog in the fight. Assuming he doesn't know the parties and he's not writing the report to benefit one of the other parties, which arguably never happens or seldom happens, the police report comes from a position from somebody who doesn't have a dog in the fight. And because it comes from that position, it holds a lot of weight. You know, when people are involved in accidents, sometimes when they're talking from their perspective, they're giving you the perspective of what they did or didn't do wrong. And the officer's perspective is coming from the position of trying to figure out what happened to cause the accident. And knowing that people are going to interpret the police report from that perspective can be helpful. And having the information from somebody who's not going to be trying to persuade you they were right or wrong when the accident took place. So that can also be one of the reasons why we want to get a police report. So knowing now that the police report has sort of the basic details, the accident description, whether or not traffic violations were given or not, injuries, as well as weather and road conditions. Now the question becomes, well, what can that police report be used for? And one of the most important things it can be used for is establishing fault. When we get involved in a case, one of the first things we have to do is notify the insurance companies who may be liable for paying damages that our law firm's involved. And initially, when we notify them that our law firm's involved, what that insurance company is going to do is make a liability determination. They're going to try to decide at the outset, do we think that we need to pay this claim or not? Do we think our insured driver is at fault or not? One of the first things that they're going to look at is a copy of the police report. And that police report is going to be critical for them making that initial determination as to who was at fault and how much they were at fault. If we have a police report indicating that somebody was driving under the influence, or somebody was speeding excessively, or somebody was on their phone prior to the accident, that can be incredibly helpful when persuading the insurance companies whose fault and how bad a fault the person had when causing the accident. Also, police reports can be helpful in supporting injury claims. And it's why it's so critical that if you're involved in an accident, you withhold telling people how you're doing until you truly know how you're doing. Oftentimes after an accident, people's adrenaline is pumping. They're in a situation they've never been in before. They don't know what's going to happen. And when somebody comes up to them and says, well, how are you doing? In that frantic, disheveled, adrenaline pumping state, they may say, I'm doing fine. I'm doing fine. Maybe because they're trying to defer attention from them. Maybe because they're more worried about their loved ones. Or truthfully, maybe it's just because they just don't know how they're doing because they're in such an unusual, crazy situation that they're not going to accurately be able to tell you how they're doing. So police reports can and often will account for injuries. And the reason that can be helpful is because if there are injuries mentioned, then the police report will oftentimes indicate that. It'll say injury accident or non-injury accident or patient transported by EMS. But it can give us the scope of injuries whenever we're working on an accident case. It can also be important because, as I mentioned, police officers are, for the most part, considered unbiased. And while I recognize there may be situations where an officer will have a dog in the fight or will have a perspective because he may know one of the individuals, for the most part, that's not typically a concern. So when we're receiving information from a police report, for the most part, we can consider that information to be coming from an unbiased, neutral source. That's also how the insurance companies look at police reports. For the most part, they trust the information contained within a police report. And there may be occasionally statements given by other people that the officers are just simply documenting, and maybe the insurance company will push back as far as the credibility of those statements. But as far as the description of the accident, the location of the vehicles, the weather and road conditions, whether citations were issued, all that information within the police report can be really persuasive information to use in resolving our clients' claims. Now, there are oftentimes situations where accidents happen and insurance companies will take recorded statements from both our client before we're involved or maybe the other driver, they're insured. Now, there are discrepancies that oftentimes come up when those recorded statements are given. Maybe one person said the light was green and the other driver says, no, my light was green. And that police report can be an incredibly helpful tool in trying to resolve those discrepancies. It's not uncommon for police reports to contain witness statements, witness information, and witness contact information. When we're trying to determine who's at fault and how they were at fault, having that information can be incredibly helpful to finally having clarity to who did what to cause this accident. Now, there are some factors that may affect police reports and their reliability. The officers who are going out to these scenes are oftentimes relying on third-party statements. And those third-party statements, with many cases, are not always the most reliable to be gathering. Again, the people involved and the people witnessing car accidents are usually in a very traumatic, stressed out, adrenaline pump state. And so the information sometimes contained within police reports will be riddled with information coming from those sources that weren't in the best state to be giving an accurate statement at that time. And so it's important that while we do give the police report some credibility, some reliability, we oftentimes need to look at it through the lens of trust but confirm. to make sure that there may be not only just one account of what this witness is saying, but maybe a second account to confirm that that is in fact what took place. When police reports are not filed, I will tell you it oftentimes creates a red flag. Now, officers and police departments have their own protocols as to when they do and don't want you to make a police report. And that may largely depend on how bad the weather road conditions are, how busy the departments are, whether or not there's injuries as a result of the accident. But one of the very first questions that we're asked is whether or not a police report is filed. And when there's not a police report filed, I think the initial response is skepticism. And it's oftentimes skepticism because the community expectations, the insurance expectations is that if you're involved in an accident, that there is a police report. Now, my suggestion to clients is this: if there's not a police report made at the time of the accident, then at very minimum, walk in and make a police report or make an online report. But do something to document what took place and where it took place so that we can provide that information to the insurance company and avoid the potential skepticism of why did they not file a police report if this in fact happened. Now, there is a difference in police report between officers' opinions and facts contained into the police report. So a fact in a police report may be something like the roads were wet at the time of arrival, or officers were dispatched at this specific time. There may be some opinions, and those opinions may be this driver caused the accident, or something of that nature where the officer is taking those facts and applying those facts to his own experience and then giving an opinion. And sometimes those opinions can be incredibly helpful, especially in the pre-suit negotiations, but they may not always be admissible. So looking through a police report and parsing through what's facts and what's opinions, not only for officers, but also for witnesses, can be really helpful to understand what we may be able to get into court as evidence versus what might just be helpful information. At the end of the day, I'll tell you this: police reports are incredibly useful information and tools in resolving our clients' cases. For anybody involved in an accident, again, I would at very minimum want to see a police report. If not, officers at the scene, an online report or a walk-in report. And for all the reasons just previously mentioned, those police reports can be incredibly helpful in resolving your case. If you have any questions about police reports, what they may be used for, how they can impact your case, know that we're always a phone call away.